What's up, everybody? Welcome to Horror Reviews. We are about to rank the Scream franchise, all 6 films, not including the television series. And Scream is one of my all-time favorite horror franchises. And I have some controversial top picks, so stick around for that number 1. Before we get into the list, I just want to say that in my opinion, Scream is just top-tier horror in general. It has stood the test of time, and so even at the very bottom of the list where I have some major issues with some of those films, I still think that it's got Ghostface in it and some of the core cast in there. And so for that, I think that we're still talking about pretty top tier horror even at the bottom of the list. Now let's get into it with number 6. So starting things off at number 6, the very bottom of the list is Scream from 2022. And while no one could have come in and followed in Wes Craven's footsteps and done nearly as good of a job as he did with the Scream film and creating that very specific Scream tone and feel, I do think Radio Silence did a pretty good job trying to emulate what Wes Craven would have done with Scream 5 if he were to be able to. But unfortunately, I think where they really fail is the script just doesn't work, the story that we get just doesn't work, and the new characters don't work for me. I'm very happy to see our legacy characters come back in Scream, but unfortunately, I don't think Courtney Cox's character is very good. I don't think that Neve Campbell's character is very good. Unfortunately, even though it's nice to see Sydney has like a nice side story with a family going on, I don't think she's very good in the film. And of course, like, she doesn't take front and center because it's not really about her, which is quite a change of pace. Although I do think that Dewey's character is actually probably one of my favorite performances from David Arquette in the Scream films. Personally, I really like Dewey's character in this. Of course, sad to see him go, but I do think this is actually probably one of my favorite performances. Unfortunately, the rest of the new characters we get, I'm not a big fan of. I know a lot of people are pretty big fans of some of these new casts. They just don't work for me. The characters that are written for them, like the twins, are supposed to be our Jamie Kennedy, and they just pale in comparison to him. The meta humor doesn't work nearly as well, and a lot of the story elements just like are begging to be like questioned. There's so many like holes in the story and things that are going on. And I also have a big problem with Ghostface and like who is behind the mask in this one, who's killing who. Go back and watch Scream 2, and there's like elements where Timothy Olyphant is like left-handed in real life, and the killer's using his left hand, and you can see that Ghostface is using his left hand. So it's like you can tell kind of who, or you can try to piece together who's behind the mask at a certain point in each movie. In this one, there's certain elements, like especially when Dewey is killed, you're like, no, I don't think so. I don't think it was her. No, it doesn't make any sense to me. She just like, picks him up. I mean, I know a lot of people have issues with that, but it's like that's a core problem with Radio Silence's writing, is they feel like they didn't think nearly as deeply about the characters and the dialogue and like what was happening in the scenes. They were paying way more attention to just kind of creating sort of ambiance in this like hospital, which, they like have a loose tie into why they're on this empty floor in the hospital and there's nobody else there. And again, that's just a major problem with their writing. They write something into the script and it's like this loose tie-in, but there's no logic behind it. And same thing with the kills. So that's my biggest problem, is these characters, they just fall flat and they're really annoying to me upon rewatch. And a lot of the dialogue just doesn't work for me. The killer reveals don't work super well for me. And so personally, this is the bottom of the list for me. But again, as I've kind of said, at least I can kind of turn my brain off and I can go in and be like, okay, it's Ghostface. I love to see Ghostface. There's some okay kills here. I think that there's a big difference, which I'll kind of get into in a minute, between like brutal kills and brutal looking kills. And so whereas Wes Craven, I feel like, really understood the concept of brutality. It's not just about what you see, but it's about the moments leading up to it and like what you feel in that scene. And I feel like Radio Silence doesn't get that. They feel like just showing us the knife staying there for longer is the same concept as like a brutal killing. And so for me, some of those moments just don't really work as well. So coming in at number 5 should be no surprise. It is Scream 6 from 2023. And Scream 6, to me, Radio Silence took some of the things they did really well in Scream and they sort of expanded on those and made it their own. I think that it was a great idea to go to New York, change the location. I think that of course, while it's cool, it's around Halloween time, and doesn't play much of a factor in the film, but it was a nice touch. I think the opening kill of Scream 6 is legendary. For me personally, I love the opening kill. I will rewatch Scream 6 just for that opening kill. And I do think that the killer reveals are a bit better in here. I definitely think the dialogue is a bit better. Some of the suspense scenes, some of the chase sequences are much better in this film, and they sort of worked a little more on what I was kind of getting at in the about talking about the first film, is that I think they didn't quite get that the suspense and the thrill leading up to the kill is more important than the kill itself half the time. And so I think that they did that a lot better in this. Unfortunately, again, the characters and the dialogue for the most part just doesn't work for me. The story we get here doesn't work. Gale Weathers just doesn't really work for me in this, unfortunately. And of course, we don't have Sydney. So I have quite a few issues there. And the plot armor, oh my gosh. But the plot armor, while is ridiculous and people should not survive what they survive, it just ruins the stakes. People getting stabbed and showing up the next frame perfectly fine just kills your movie. You have no stakes. There's nothing to get invested in when that happens. But for me, the most egregious part is that there are moments of plot armor like that are only used to kind of distract the audience. And if you watch my channel, I hate that. I hate where films will just try to pull the wool over your eyes just for the sake of trying to do it. When you think about the plot, it doesn't really make sense. So for example, when they're on the subway and Mindy gets stabbed and Jack Champion's character pretends to help her and come to her rescue, right? There's that moment they're on the subway and he drags her out and then he calls the cops or whatever and sends her to the hospital. Who is that for? If you really think about that scene, who's with her? No one, really, right? That's why she gets stabbed. She's alone. That's how Ghostface gets to her. So Ghostface is able to get to her to stab her, and then Jack Champion saves her, which again, plot armor, ridiculous. She shows up next whatever scene, she's fine. But who is that benefit for? Because later on we find out he's one of the killers, right? So really think about that in the plot. Why would Ghostface not, first of all, have just killed her if that was the ultimate goal? Why would he not have just really killed her? It's always if someone were to come in and interrupt Ghostface or something were to happen, but nothing really happens to make the killer stop, except for the fact that he's in a crowded subway train. So why did Jack Champion's character save Mindy? It was simply to throw the audience off guard, to make you think that he's not one of the killers. But what purpose does that serve? If there's a third act and there's 3 killers and they're just trying to kill everybody, what would be the point of having one more body show up where they just go to the hospital and come back later? And also if he stabbed her so she's hurt, she wouldn't be in the third act reveal, right? According to logic in the movie, she shouldn't be there. She should be in the hospital. So if he wanted her dead, it just doesn't make any sense. It's only to put the audience off of him as a killer. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, where it's a movie just trying to pull the wool over your eyes just for the sake of doing it instead of actually trying to make sense logically in the film. Of course, in Scream 6, there's just a whole bunch of moments like that. The script just falls apart, especially upon rewatch. Those moments are just glaring. They stand out to me. The meta humor just doesn't work. A lot of character choices don't work. And let's not even talk about Kirby. Poor Kirby, what they did to her. Oh, so everyone was so excited to see Kirby back, and they just ruined her character. I mean, not only is she helpless, but they made her be a red herring, but a red herring in the worst way. And she's completely wasted in this film. Poor Kirby. We waited so many years to see her come back. I do really like that they got Mike Shinoda to come in and do this song for the opening credits thing. That feels very 90s to me, when they used to have rappers and artists come in and do songs specifically for movies, and that was a big thing, 90s, 2000s. So for me, that was just a moment where I was really excited when I saw that he had done the song specifically for Scream. So that's just an element that I really enjoyed. But overall, there are definitely some better kills in this film. There's some elements I enjoy, but it's just so hard to really enjoy it all the way through. I have to just turn my brain off and try not to think about it, because ultimately, unfortunately, these Scream and Scream 6, Scream 5, whatever, are just not very good films. Like, I understand people may have fun with them and enjoy them, but when you think about the script, it's not enough to just say, yeah, it's horror comedy or it's Scream. It has to make some sense and it has to be at least somewhat thought out. And these films are just not very solid films. The other thing is Scream 6 title, which I understand why they called Scream 5 Scream. I understand that, but then they called Scream 6 Scream 6. That drives me absolutely nuts. Like, why would they do that? Just call, if you're going to call it Scream, just call this one like Scream New York or some random thing like that. Not Scream 6. When there's no Scream 5, it's just, Moving right along to number 4, which is Scream 3 from 2000. And personally, I love Scream 3. It's definitely got issues. It's definitely a product of its time, unfortunately, being cut, being restrained because of what was going on at the time the film was being made. And unfortunately, that does hold it back a bit. And I can see how Scream 3 may have gone a little too meta or be a little too over the top for certain people, but it's a fun as heck movie. I still love it. I love being set in Hollywood. I love the concept of them making stab films in Hollywood and in all our cast back together, trying to figure out this mystery. And I love the concept of this trilogy rule, going back to the beginning and finding out something that was never true to begin with. The way that Scream sets up these rules and really sticks to them, like the sequel and the trilogy, I love what they did with that. I personally love the opening with Cotton Weary. I thought it was the best way to go. Perfect opening for me. I really enjoyed that. And then also just like, it definitely feels very 2000s. Unfortunately, some of the kills are not as bloody, but as I've kind of stated in this film, I think the kills still really work because they're infused with a lot of fun, a lot of tension, and like some chase scenes leading up to them. A lot of really cool sets, like the house at the end, which is the same house from Halloween H2O. I'm sure some people know that, but so that house is a perfect setting for that final sequence. I love Patrick Dempsey's character as the cop. And so I really enjoy, Sydney's character and evolution too, how she's kind of like moved out into the middle of nowhere and she's trying to really seclude herself, but still try to survive. And she's kind of called back into Hollywood instead of, the killer finding her or whatever. She's kind of forced to come out. I really like that element. I think there's some really clever writing with the multiple Deweys, multiple Gales in here. And I personally love the killer being Sydney's brother. I really liked that reveal. I think that his character was in it just enough so that it works at the end. It's films have tried to do that before where you barely see the character, and that kind of happens in Scream 2 a little bit also. But I think that he's in it just enough that you could think, okay, I can see how he's involved in the film. He's behind the scenes. He's making things happen. And it kind of makes sense. I personally like the idea that it's just one killer. This is the only film where we get just one killer. And I really like that. And whether that was originally intended or not, I'm not talking about what was originally intended for these films. I know Scream 2 was intended to be a different film. Scream 3 was intended to be a different film. But the film that we got, the killer that we got, I personally really enjoy it. And I like, if you think about the fact that Scream 1 is a surprise and 2 killers. And then Scream 2, they're like, do 2 killers again. It only makes sense that Scream 3 would be almost 3 killers or something, some sort of twist, right? So I like the concept of actually it's just 1 killer instead of, Scream 1 is 2 killers, Scream 3 is just 1 killer. I just really like that idea. It kind of turned it on its head a little bit. And I think that his reveal at the end when he's locked in the movie theater showing room with her is a great reveal. I think some of his monologue is great. And I love Sydney's attitude towards him at the end when she just gives him that back and that little moment of that relationship that they have. Some of my favorite fight sequences with Sydney in this film. I also like how they were able to cram Jamie Kennedy back into this film again. And it's kind of bittersweet. He's like, if you're watching this, I probably didn't make it. So sad. But, Scream 3 is genuinely a solid horror film. I can see how, especially at the time, people didn't like it as much. And now people just I think look at it with certain lens. But if you compare Scream 3 to some of the slashers we've gotten in recent memory, especially some the really terrible ones It's a Wonderful Knife and some of these terrible films, Scream 3 is a solid slasher film still. Great cast of characters, great acting, great continuation of the story. And if you, for some reason, haven't seen it in a while because you look at it as just like the black sheep of the Scream series, give it another shot. Now we are down to the top 3 Scream films, in my opinion, in my list. And, you know, the top 3 Scream films, they honestly can switch around at any moment depending on what mood I'm in. I love them. I love all 3 films. I love all the top 4 Scream films, but the top 3 particularly, at any given day, almost you could plug one in a different spot. As of right now, this list, number 3 is Scream 4 from 2011. And I know there's some people who don't really enjoy Scream 4. I do not really understand that. But especially if you put yourself in the place of Scream 4 coming out. Now we have all these legacy sequels coming out. And it's a very like modern thing to have movies, you know, decades later get a sequel and have the cast return. But that's a newer thing. At the time that Scream 4 came out, there were not a lot of franchises that had sequels, especially ones that would, sequels years later, especially ones that would bring the same cast back and continue the storyline. That like never happened. It was all remakes, which of course Scream 4 talks about. All remakes at the time, or like straight to DVD sequels or whatever it is. Very rarely do we have a sequel like that. Scream 4 coming 10 years after, actually 11 years after the last Scream film. It was a really hard task to come back to theaters with the same cast, same storyline, capture audiences again, get people to go back into theaters and see a 4th film in a series that they haven't seen from a long time. And that opening sequence in Scream 4, I think, is just absolute genius. I love it so much. I remember being in the theater at the midnight premiere, back when people could have Ghostface masks on in the midnight premiere still. People with the Ghostface masks on, and that opening kill just being like, as first you see two Ghostface in the opening part, and you're like, oh, that's new, 2 Ghostface. And then you get that twist, and then that second twist, I think it was absolutely pure genius. And then to Wes Craven's directing in that opening scene to capture your attention with like that high energy kill, and then immediately go into another kill with a couple of like, you know, well-known actors in there, but then to kind of turn on its head and you have a third opening scene, and to slow the pace down of that opening scene, follow those characters and build suspense again after you just saw 2 openings where people were slaughtered, 2 like false openings. That's tough. Amazing writing, amazing direction from Wes Craven to take your attention back and like slowly bring you in and create suspense again. And then just the opening, seeing the town with all the Ghostface masks and the like posts, seeing, you know, Dewey and Courtney Cox back and like the Gale, our old characters, and everybody back. I think the story that they wrote was absolutely perfect, especially for the time. I know there's some issues with how the film looks, but I think that even though it's not my favorite looking film, it does look like a time period, and I really appreciate that. It stands out as Scream 4 to me, and when I watch it, it almost makes me enjoy it a little more sometimes because it really feels like that moment in time in 2011. And I think that the story we get here is perfect for especially the time when it was all remakes, and no other film has done this the way that Scream 4 did. And I don't think that Scream 4 gets enough props for this. The whole don't F with the original concept, that is such a crucial thing that Scream 2022 and Scream 6 did not get right. You know, they didn't do justice to all of the original characters and storylines. And that's such a huge thing that Scream 4 really nails and does that was so different at the time. And I just don't think that it gets enough credit for that. Kills in here are awesome. They're more brutal. As I kind of alluded to earlier, Wes Craven really understands the concept of building that suspense where, you know, you've got Jill Roberts' character in the window across the room, and then her friend across the other way, and you're building suspense with that phone call, and then that kill ends up being across the room, and you just see her like being thrown. It just adds so much to the brutality. You don't even really see her get like chopped up. You don't see the knife go in as much, but it's the blood, the way she's getting torn up, the sounds, and then the aftermath where she's laying with like her guts ripped out and the blood's all over the wall. And Sidney's reaction when she comes in and she just covers her mouth and like just crunches down onto the floor. That is like what makes brutality. And Wes Craven understood that. It's the buildup, the suspense, the characters, and the reaction. That's what gives you brutal scenes. It's what gets you to care about characters, not just having a character turn around and like get stabbed and the knife just sit there for like 20 minutes. It just doesn't do the same thing. So Scream 4, in my opinion, super underrated. I think it does so many things so much better than many modern slashers, and R.I.P. Wes Craven, the man's a genius. I personally think Scream 4 sometimes can be at number 1 on my list. I know that's controversial. At the moment, it's number 3, but it's super just underrated and, man, deserves a place high up on this list. Now, here we are to the top 2, and we're about to get real controversial. Number 2, the Scream from 1996, the original Scream film. Yes, I know, is number 2 on my list, and I will explain more about why my number 1 is my number 1 when I get to it. But for the time being, Scream is just an amazing film in general. Being number 2 does not negate that, doesn't take that away. Scream is such a product of its time. It was so revolutionary in concept. I think people forget, because we have so many of these types of movies today, they forget what impact it had when it came out to theaters. How horror was in a slump. And, you know, of course, I can't speak from personal experience because I was not one of those people. I was 6 years old. I was not one of those people to be able to actually experience that, but it did have such a cultural impact. It's so unbelievably well written. It launched, you know, a bunch of careers, including Kevin Williamson, of course, who wrote this first screenplay that he sold and launched his career. And so, you know, and then, man, full circle, we get him coming back to direct Scream 7. Heck yeah. The killer reveals in Scream are definitely top tier. Billy and Stu are 2 of the best killers in the franchise, of course. Stu especially, and I know a lot of people want to see him come back. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but, you know, he's an amazing balance to Billy is the thing. That's what it really got right, too. Stu's like over the top zaniness, but still grounded in his like psychosis, is the perfect match for Billy's like dark and brooding, sort of like, you know, has motivation but doesn't have motivation killer, and his plotting and methodicalness, and his just, they're the perfect balance for each other, perfect reveal to the audience. And now, this is another one of those where if you go back just a few minutes ago when I say Scream from Scream 6, where on the train or the subway, oh my gosh, when they had that false kill that was just trying to dissuade the audience, there's an argument you can make that Scream 1 does that, but I disagree. Scream 1 is yes, it's trying to throw the audience off also, but it's entirely built around a plan for that third act reveal, and it also makes sense when you learn about the characters because you've built up these killers, and when you get that reveal of Billy, he is just soaking up that reveal, soaking up that like moment where he has fooled Sidney, he's got her, she thinks he died, and he is like licking his finger, talking about the blood and Carrie, you know, and quoting Psycho, and he's just like savoring every moment of that, and it perfectly fits with his character in the film. Completely intentional, completely planned out, not simply just to throw the audience off so that they can have a reveal later on. It's completely different, and it works way better. I mean, what else is there to say about Scream? You know, you've got an amazing final girl in Sidney, but also an amazing supporting cast, and second final girl in Gale Weathers, amazing supporting cast in Survivors and Jamie Kennedy's character, and in Dewey, and just amazing set with the house, amazing suspense and chase sequences, and of course, fantastic like turning the rules of horror on its head, talking about killers chasing women up, the girls upstairs, and them like running upstairs instead of going out the front door, and that moment where she can't get out the front door. Just so many iconic scenes, so many iconic moments, so many suspenseful scenes that still hold up today. You know, it's like, what else is there to say about Scream? Honestly, it is a classic, and I still think it's actually kind of underrated still because it's so well known and it's created such an impact, and you've got so many other comedy horrors out there. I think people don't fully appreciate what it does really well and what it did for the time. And here we are at number 1, my favorite film in the Scream franchise. Of course, as you're following along, you know what it is. It is 1997's Scream 2, the sequel to the groundbreaking film Scream. And the reason that Scream 2 is actually my number 1 is because I saw it first. Well, it's one of the huge contributing factors, I should say. I think it's a very underrated sequel, and it does so many things well that a sequel should do, and it's not fully appreciated for that. But I actually saw Scream 2 first. So let me take you back a little bit to the, perusing the aisles of Blockbuster. I was a kid, I don't know, probably 8, 9 years old, maybe. I don't know how old I was. Came out in 97. I was 7 when it came out. So it was probably on VHS, maybe 98, because it took a while for movies to come out. Anyway, I'm perusing the Blockbuster with my mom, and, you know, as a lot of people who are my age will remember those days, you didn't know a lot about films. You would just look at the covers, and the covers would be your deciding factor for a lot of the films. So the cover of Scream 2 stood out to me, and I took it home, and I remember I watched it. My mom let me watch Scream 2. I watched it by myself, and my mind was absolutely blown. At that time, I had seen enough horror to like horror. Maybe I was 9, 10, I don't remember. Maybe I was a little older, but I definitely seen some horror. I had appreciated some horror, but I wasn't old enough to have seen a ton of horror yet. And I had no concept that like horror movies could be like this. Scream 2 was just so fun, and it was infused with so much like witty dialogue and so much energy. And it was so fun to watch, and yet at the same time, so suspenseful and so intense, and it was brutal, and I had no idea that movies could be like this. Like, this was like a whole new thing. It blew my mind that films could be so fun and be horror. And so I will always remember that feeling I had after watching Scream 2 for the first time and just being like, I need more of this. Whatever this is it. This is like my favorite genre. I need to see more of these types of films. So of course, when I watched Scream years later for the first time, it still worked and it still was good, but it didn't have nearly the impact that Scream 2 did because, again, I saw that first. So I didn't know the characters, or I didn't know anything. You know, I didn't really understand the story that was like continuation of the story that was going on, or the sequel rules at the time. I didn't understand any of that necessarily, but I just knew that this was the type of movie that I wanted to make and watch. So because of that, Scream 2 will always have a special place in my heart, and forever I will remember going through the Blockbuster aisles, picking out that VHS cover and going home and watching that film, and just my mind being opened to an entirely different genre of films. And there's not many experiences like that anymore. You know, you only get a few films that really impact you that way. And of course, Scream 2 will always be a huge, huge factor in what the films that I want to make and the films that I like. And so that is one of the groundwork and like foundation for, you know, my appreciation for horror films these days. So of course it's number 1. I sometimes, as I said, I could put number 4 first or number 1 first, depending on what mood I'm in. You know, sometimes they hit different. If I want to put one on, I might put one different one on. So it might be like my favorite at the moment. But ultimately, when I'm making this list, Scream 2 is usually at the top of the list, mostly because of that nostalgia. But I do think also coming into the sequel, there was such huge shoes to fill. Scream was such a huge like breakout success, and you had a young writer and you had a director trying to follow up. Sequelitis is a big thing, and so you have a director trying to outdo himself while also trying to like stay true to these rules of this sequel. And I think it does so many things well. The opening scene in the movie theater with Jada Pinkett Smith is fantastic. I think the kills are great. I think that the red herring of her boyfriend really works in this film. I think the college setting is great. And the reveal of Mickey, he is I love Timothy Olyphant. He is one of my favorite characters. I think he plays it just perfect, just almost over the top, just enough. And you get that like moment of him like sitting up and shaking his head. I love that moment. I can just imagine it in my head every time I think about this film. Oh man, I love, he's one of my favorite killers. I think he's fantastic. And then I like the continuation of the story of just, Billy's mom. It does make sense. Comes from a messed up family. And so of course Billy's family would, try to do something, but I like the idea that she's like sane and she hires help to try to get revenge, and gets invested in her life, but like from the side. And I do think this, again, with the rules of the sequel set up here, that we get are just like iconic, and I don't feel like Scream 2 just gets enough love and appreciation for coming and following such a huge film and not just like pooping the bed with it, because there's so many opportunities with changing scripts, changing stories, original ideas not being able to be used, so many opportunities to not work. And I just don't think that Scream 2 gets enough credit for really sticking the landing. That's my list, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think below. I want to see your lists. Put them in below, or if you have a Letterboxd, follow me on Letterboxd. My list is on there, and maybe you can link your list and I'll check it out below. Let me know what you guys think and give me some reasons why do you have iconic memories, core memories with these films. If you're around my age watching the Scream films, give me your theater experience. I forgot to mention that Scream 3 was the first Scream I got to see in theaters, but dang, should have mentioned that there. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate it.
Got 'em running scared, I'm a big bad wolf. Oh, I never see the silver lining, only see the gold. I don't speak in caps, dog, everything bold. And I put that on myself, cause it's a life that I done chose. I said come through, you can see me on the west side. Now it's funny how they walking with each chest.